The Velthari Dominion had ruled the stars for 10,000 years, and in all that time they had never known fear. They were perfect predators, born with 8 powerful limbs covered in natural armor that could stop a plasma bolt, and their minds were cold, calculating machines that felt nothing but the satisfaction of conquest. 17 species had fallen before them across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, and each conquest had been easier than the last because the Velthari had learned one simple truth. Most species were weak, and weakness was meant to be exploited. High Commander Rextal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, and watched the blue-green planet spinning slowly in the void below. His 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the readings on his tactical display, and his mandibles clicked together in what passed for amusement among his kind. "What do we know about these creatures?" he asked his science officer. Vorkith, the lead researcher assigned to this expedition, stepped forward and projected a holographic image of the beings that lived on the planet below. They were soft and pink, standing on only 2 legs with 2 arms that ended in delicate fingers, and their bodies had no armor, no claws, no natural weapons of any kind. "They call themselves humans," Vorkith explained, "and they arrived on this world approximately 40 of their years ago. They have named their settlement New Providence, and our scans indicate a population of roughly 12,000 individuals." Rextal made a dismissive sound deep in his throat. 12,000 soft creatures with no defenses, he said, "and what of their military capabilities?" "Minimal," Vorkith replied. "They have a small security force equipped with primitive projectile weapons and a handful of patrol vessels in orbit, but nothing that could threaten even our smallest warship." The High Commander turned to face his bridge crew, and his voice carried the cold confidence of a predator who had never been challenged. "We will conduct a standard acquisition raid," he announced. "Harvest 100 specimens for study and labor, then move on to the next system. This should take no more than 6 hours." None of them questioned the order because questioning a high commander meant death, and besides, they had done this many times before. The raid began at midnight local time, when the human colony was sleeping. Velthari dropships descended through the clouds like silent shadows, their stealth technology making them invisible to the primitive human sensors, and within minutes the warriors were moving through the streets of New Providence. They were efficient and brutal, breaking down doors and dragging screaming humans from their beds, and any who resisted were struck down with nerve whips that left them paralyzed and twitching on the ground. In a small house near the edge of the settlement, a 7-year-old girl named Lily Chen woke to the sound of her mother screaming. She sat up in her bed, clutching the stuffed rabbit her grandmother had given her, and her heart pounded in her chest as she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. The door to her room exploded inward, and Lily saw a nightmare standing in the door. The Velthari warrior was twice the height of her father, with 8 legs that clicked against the floor and 4 arms that ended in razor-sharp claws, and its face was a mass of mandibles and glowing red eyes that showed no mercy and no emotion. Lily screamed as the creature grabbed her with 2 of its arms, and she kicked and fought with all the strength in her small body, but she might as well have been fighting a mountain. "Daddy," she cried out, "Daddy, help me." Somewhere in the house she heard her father roaring with rage, heard the sound of gunfire and breaking furniture, but then there was a heavy thud and silence. The warrior carried her out into the night where she saw other humans being loaded into transport pods, their faces blank with shock and terror, and among them she spotted her mother and father being dragged by their arms, both of them unconscious and bleeding. Lily clutched the small pendant that hung around her neck, a gift her father had given her on her 6th birthday, and she remembered what he had told her when he put it on her. "If you are ever in danger," he had said, his eyes serious and his voice firm, "you press this button and hold it for 3 seconds, and I will come for you no matter where you are or what stands in my way. Do you understand me, baby girl?" She had nodded then, not really understanding, thinking it was just another one of her father's silly games. But now, as the Velthari warrior carried her toward the waiting dropship, she pressed the button with her tiny thumb and held it tight. The pendant blinked once, twice, 3 times, and then began to pulse with a steady red light. 300 light-years away, in the massive orbital station that served as the headquarters of United Earth Command, an alarm began to sound. Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo was working the night shift in the Emergency Response Center when the alert flashed across her screen, and for a moment she could not believe what she was seeing. "Ma'am," she called out, her voice tight with urgency, "we have a Priority 1 distress signal from the Kepler sector." Senior Watch Officer Commander Park walked over and looked at the screen, and his face went pale. "That is a child protection beacon," he said quietly, "active and transmitting from an unknown vessel moving away from Colony." "What does that mean?" a junior officer asked. Commander Park was already reaching for the direct line to Admiral Tanaka, and his hands were shaking. "It means someone just took one of our children," he said, "and God help them for what comes next." Admiral Yuki Tanaka was 63 years old and had served in the United Earth Navy for 40 years, and in all that time she had seen humanity face many threats. But nothing made her blood run cold like the words she heard when she answered the emergency call at 3 in the morning. "Admiral," Commander Park said, "we have confirmed abduction of human civilians from New Providence Colony, including at least 1 child. The beacon belongs to Lily Chen, age 7, daughter of Colonel James Chen." The Admiral closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she opened them again, they were filled with something ancient and terrible. "Wake everyone," she ordered. "The War Council, every fleet admiral, every ship captain within range. I want a full briefing in 1 hour." "Ma'am," Park hesitated, "should we attempt diplomatic contact first?" Admiral Tanaka's voice was like ice cracking. "They took a child," she said. "There will be no diplomacy. There will be no negotiation. Get me Colonel Chen and get me my fleet." She ended the call and stood alone in her quarters, looking out at the stars that suddenly seemed darker than before. The Velthari had no way of knowing what they had done. They thought they had simply collected another specimen, another weak creature to study and dissect, and they could not have imagined that this one small act would bring their entire civilization to its knees. Because they did not understand humans. They did not know that humanity had spent its entire existence fighting for survival against predators and plagues and each other, and that this endless struggle had forged them into something that no other species in the galaxy could comprehend. And most importantly, they did not know about the bond between human parents and their children. A bond that could not be broken by distance or danger, or even death itself. A bond that would drive a father to cross the stars and burn worlds to ash. The Velthari would learn these things soon enough. And the lesson would cost them everything. The Velthari research station orbited a dead moon at the edge of their territory, a massive structure of black metal and cold lights where countless species had been studied and broken and discarded. Lily Chen had been in her cell for 3 days, though she had no way of knowing how much time had passed because there were no windows and the lights never changed. The cell was small and bare, with only a hard platform to sleep on and a hole in the corner that she assumed was meant to be a toilet, and the walls were so smooth and cold that they made her shiver even when she wrapped herself in the thin blanket they had given her. She was scared, more scared than she had ever been in her short life, but she tried to remember what her father had always told her. "Fear is okay," he would say. "Being scared does not make you weak. What matters is what you do when you are afraid." So Lily did the only thing she could think of to keep the fear from swallowing her whole. She sang. Her voice was small and trembling at first, but as the hours passed it grew stronger. Filling the cold cell with the songs her mother had taught her, lullabies and nursery rhymes, and the silly made-up songs they would sing together while cooking dinner. The Velthari guards outside her cell did not know what to make of this behavior. "Why does it make those sounds?" one of them asked his companion. "Unknown," the other replied. "Perhaps it is a distress call to others of its kind." "There are no others of its kind within range to hear it." "Then it is wasting energy. These humans are even more illogical than the initial reports suggested." In the main research laboratory, lead researcher Vorkith was preparing for his first detailed examination of the human specimens. He had already dissected 2 of the adults, carefully cataloging their primitive organs and weak musculature, and he had been deeply unimpressed by what he found. No natural weapons, no armor, no redundant organ systems, and a brain that seemed far too large for a species with such limited physical capabilities. But the child intrigued him. Vorkith had studied the young of many species, and they all behaved the same way when captured. They became docile and quiet, conserving energy and waiting for death or rescue that would never come. The human child was different. She sang, she talked to herself. She even smiled at the guards when they brought her food, and this behavior made no sense to a mind that had been trained to see the universe in terms of pure efficiency and logic. "Bring the small one to examination room 7, he ordered. 2 guards dragged Lily down the long corridor, her bare feet scraping against the cold metal floor, and when they threw her onto the examination table, she looked up at Vorkith with wide eyes that held fear, but also something else. Something that looked almost like defiance. "You are an interesting specimen," Vorkith said, his translator converting his clicking speech into words she could understand. "I am going to learn everything about your species from you." "My name is Lily," she said, "not specimen." Vorkith tilted his head, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "Your name is irrelevant," he replied. "You are property of the Velthari Dominion now, and you will answer my questions. I want my mommy and daddy. Your parental units are in separate holding cells. Whether you see them again depends on your cooperation." Lily's lower lip trembled, but she did not cry. "What do you want to know?" she asked quietly. Over the next several hours, Vorkith subjected her to a battery of tests, measuring her reflexes and her pain responses and her cognitive functions, and through it all Lily tried to be brave. When he stuck needles in her arm, she whimpered, but did not scream. When he made her run on a machine until her legs burned, she kept going until she collapsed. When he asked her questions about human society and human emotions, she answered as best she could, even though she did not understand why he wanted to know these things. "You experience an emotion called love," Vorkith said, studying the brain scans he had taken. "Explain this to me." "Love is when you care about someone more than yourself," Lily said, "like how my daddy would do anything to protect me and my mommy." "That is inefficient. Caring for others weakens your ability to survive." Lily shook her head. "No," she said, "it makes you stronger, because when you love someone you have something worth fighting for." Vorkith made a note in his file. Subject displays illogical attachment, behaviors typical of primitive species. But somewhere deep in his cold, calculating mind, a small question began to form, a question he had never asked before in all his years of research. What would it feel like to have something worth fighting for? He dismissed the thought immediately. Such questions were weakness, and weakness had no place in the Dominion. Over the following days, Lily was returned to her cell between examination sessions, and she began to notice that she was not alone. There were other prisoners in the cells around her, members of different species the Velthari had conquered, and most of them had given up hope long ago. But Lily could not accept despair. Through the small gaps in her cell door she would whisper to the prisoner across from her, a 4-armed creature called Drexy, whose name was Keth, and she learned that he had been here for many months and had watched dozens of other prisoners be taken away and never return. "Why do you still talk?" Keth asked her one night, his voice weak and raspy. "Why do you still sing?" "Because if I stop," Lily said, "then they win." Keth made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are strange, little human. My daddy says being strange is okay." "Your daddy sounds wise." A few days later, the guards came and beat Keth for some minor violation, and they left him bleeding on the floor of his cell, too weak to move. Lily pressed her face against the gap in her door and sang to him, soft and gentle, the lullaby her mother sang when she had nightmares, and Keth listened with his eyes closed as the life slowly left his body. "Thank you, little human," he whispered with his last breath. "I had forgotten what kindness felt like." When Vorketh heard about this incident, he was confused. "Why did you waste energy comforting a dying creature?" he asked Lily during her next examination. "Because no one should die alone," she said, "and because it was the right thing to do." Right and wrong are constructs of primitive minds. There is only survival and extinction. Lily looked up at him, and for just a moment Vorketh felt something unfamiliar under her gaze, something that made him want to look away. "My daddy is coming," she said, "and when he gets here he is going to be really, really mad at you." Vorketh clicked his mandibles in amusement. "Your parental unit is 300 light-years away with no knowledge of your location," he said. "Even if he wanted to rescue you, he would have no way to find you, and no means to reach you, and no hope of defeating the Dominion's forces." Lily smiled, and it was the smile of a child who knew something the adults did not. "You do not know my daddy," she said. Vorketh returned her to her cell and made a note in his file. Subject: demonstrates delusional coping mechanisms and irrational belief in rescue. He thought nothing more of it. He should have. Because 300 light-years away, the largest fleet in human history was preparing to launch, and at its head was a father who would tear the galaxy apart to keep a promise he had made to his little girl. Colonel James Chen stood in the center of the United Earth Command war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing fleet positions and tactical data, but his eyes were fixed on a single image floating before him. It was a photograph of his daughter, taken on her 7th birthday just 2 months ago, and in it she was laughing and covered in cake frosting while her mother tried to wipe her face. He had looked at this image 1,000 times since receiving the news, and each time he felt the same fire burning in his chest, a fire that would not be extinguished until Lily was safe in his arms. "Colonel Chen," Admiral Tanaka's voice cut through his thoughts, "the War Council is ready for you." James turned and walked into the main briefing chamber where the most powerful military minds in human space had gathered. Admirals and generals and strategists who had dedicated their lives to protecting humanity. Every single one of them stood when he entered, and he saw in their eyes the same fury that burned in his own heart. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Tanaka began, 72 hours ago an unknown alien species conducted a raid on New Providence Colony and abducted 93 human civilians, including 7 children. She pressed a button, and the holographic display changed to show an image of a Velthari warrior captured by the colony's security cameras. "We have identified the attackers as the Velthari Dominion, a spacefaring empire that has conquered at least 17 other species. They are technologically advanced, militarily powerful, and by all accounts completely ruthless." General Morrison, the commander of United Earth Ground Forces, leaned forward. "What do we know about their defenses?" "Limited intelligence," Tanaka admitted, "but our analysts estimate they have between 15 and 20 capital ships in the sector where we believe the prisoners are being held." "And what do we have?" Tanaka allowed herself a small smile. "As of this morning, 37 battlecruisers, 212 destroyers, 43,000 Marines, and every long-range bomber wing we could mobilize." A murmur went through the room, and General Morrison raised an eyebrow. That seems excessive for a rescue operation. It is not excessive, Colonel Chen spoke for the first time, his voice flat and cold. It is the beginning. The room went silent, and every eye turned to the father whose daughter had been stolen. I have read the intelligence reports, James continued, and I know what the Velthari do to their captives. They experiment on them, they break them, they use them as slave labor until they die, and then they move on to the next species. He walked to the center of the room, his boots echoing on the metal floor. My daughter is 7 years old, he said. She is afraid of the dark and she cannot sleep without her stuffed rabbit, and she thinks I am the strongest person in the universe. His voice cracked slightly, but he forced himself to continue. I am going to prove her right. He turned to face Admiral Tanaka. I'm not just going to rescue those prisoners, Admiral. I'm going to make sure that no alien species ever considers taking a human child again. I am going to teach the Velthari what happens when you touch something that belongs to humanity, and I am going to make that lesson so painful and so absolute that it echoes across the galaxy for 1,000 years. The War Council was silent for a long moment, and then General Morrison stood up. The Velthari have never faced a species that fights back, he said. They have always preyed on the weak and the peaceful. They do not know what they have awakened. Admiral Tanaka nodded slowly. Colonel Chen, you will have command of the rescue operation. The UES Vengeful Father has been reactivated and will serve as your flagship. James felt his heart skip a beat. The Vengeful Father was a legend, a massive dreadnought that had led humanity to victory in 3 colonial wars before being scheduled for decommissioning, and its very name was a promise of what was to come. Thank you, Admiral. Do not thank me yet, Tanaka said, because I am giving you authorization to do whatever is necessary to bring our people home. There will be no rules of engagement, no restrictions, and no mercy. She looked around the room at the assembled officers. The Velthari have made a mistake that many species have made throughout human history. They looked at our soft bodies and our peaceful colonies, and they assumed we were weak. They studied our technology and our biology, and they thought they understood us. Her eyes hardened. But they did not study our history. She pressed another button, and the holographic display began cycling through images. The trenches of World War I, where millions died in the mud. The beaches of Normandy, where soldiers charged into certain death for the hope of freedom. The rubble of cities bombed to dust and rebuilt by sheer human stubbornness. The colonies on Mars and Europa, established through decades of sacrifice and determination. Humanity has spent its entire existence fighting, Tanaka said. We have fought predators and plagues and ice ages and each other. We have fought when victory was impossible and survival was unlikely, and hope was nothing but a distant dream. She turned to face Colonel Chen. And we have never, not once in 10,000 years of recorded history, abandoned our children to their enemies. The War Council rose to their feet as one, and James saw tears in the eyes of hardened warriors who had faced death 100 times. Fleet Admiral Chen, Tanaka said, using his new rank for the first time, your orders are simple. Find our people, bring them home, and make the Velthari regret the day they ever heard the word human. James saluted, and his voice rang out clear and strong. Yes, ma'am. 3 days later, the largest fleet in human history assembled at the edge of known space, a forest of metal and fire stretching across the void, and at its heart floated the newly awakened UES Vengeful Father. On its bridge, Fleet Admiral James Chen stood before his crew and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. Every one of you volunteered for this mission, he said, and I know why. Because somewhere out there in the darkness our families are waiting for us, our children are waiting for us, and we will not rest until they are safe. He looked out at the stars that hid his daughter. The Velthari think they are predators, he said. They think they are the most dangerous things in the universe, but they have never met humanity at war. He raised his hand and pointed toward the distant enemy. Today we show them what real predators look like. Today we show them what happens when you threaten the pack. Today we remind the galaxy why the name human should be spoken with fear and respect. He dropped his hand in a chopping motion. All ships jump to slipspace. We have a war to win and children to bring home. The fleet vanished into the light, carrying with it the wrath of an entire species. And somewhere in the cold depths of space, the Velthari continued their experiments, completely unaware that death itself was racing toward them at faster than light speed. High Commander Rextal received the warning from his border stations 3 days before the human fleet arrived, and his reaction was one of mild annoyance rather than concern. "How many ships?" he asked his tactical officer. "Approximately 250 vessels, High Commander, including what appears to be a very large command ship." Rextal clicked his mandibles in contempt. "And they think this force can challenge the Dominion?" "It would seem so, High Commander." "Fools!" He turned to study the tactical display, watching the swarm of human ships moving through space toward his position, and he felt nothing but confidence. The Velthari had 18 warships in this sector, each one equipped with plasma cannons and energy shields and armor that had never been breached by any species they had encountered, and their warriors were the deadliest fighters in the known galaxy. The humans were soft creatures with primitive weapons and fragile ships, and they were flying directly into a trap. "Let them come," Rextal ordered. "We will destroy their fleet and then harvest the survivors for study. Perhaps their desperation will make them more interesting than the specimens we already have." He did not know that he had just made the last mistake of his life. The human fleet dropped out of slipspace at the edge of the Velthari defensive perimeter, and for a long moment, both sides simply stared at each other across the void. On the bridge of the Vengeful Father, Fleet Admiral James Chen studied the enemy formation with cold, calculating eyes, noting their positions and their weapon placements and their shield configurations. "They are not moving to intercept," his tactical officer reported. "They seem to be waiting for us to come to them." "They are arrogant," James replied. "They think their defensive position makes them invincible." "And does it?" James smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "No." He opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All ships, this is Fleet Admiral Chen. The enemy is positioned in a standard defensive formation around the research station. Our people are on that station, including 93 civilians and 7 children." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I want every pilot, every gunner, every Marine to remember why we are here. We are not fighting for territory or resources or pride. We are fighting for our families." His voice hardened to steel. "Attack pattern Omega, all ships weapons free. No mercy, no quarter, no surrender." The human fleet surged forward like a tide of fire. Rextal watched the human ships accelerating toward his defensive line and felt the first flicker of unease. They were not maneuvering tactically, not probing for weaknesses or seeking advantageous positions. They were simply coming straight at him at maximum speed with all weapons charging. "This is illogical," he muttered. "They are throwing away any tactical advantage." His science officer looked up from his console with an expression that might have been fear. "High Commander, their ships are broadcasting on all frequencies. It appears to be some kind of audio transmission." "What are they saying?" "Unknown, High Commander. It is not words, it is some kind of rhythmic noise." Rextal ordered the transmission played over the bridge speakers, and the sound that filled the air made even his cold blood run slightly colder. It was drums. Deep thundering drums beating out a rhythm of war, accompanied by thousands of human voices roaring in unison, a sound of pure fury and determination that seemed to shake the very fabric of space. "What is that?" Rextal demanded. "I believe," his science officer said slowly. It is what humans call a battle cry. The first human ships reached weapons range and opened fire. The Velthari shields flickered and sparked under the assault, holding firm against the primitive projectile weapons and energy beams, and Rextal felt a moment of relief. "Return fire," he ordered. "Destroy them all." The Velthari plasma cannons unleashed their fury, tearing through human ships like claws through flesh, and for a moment it seemed like the battle would be over quickly. But then something happened that Rextal had never seen in all his years of conquest. The human ships kept coming. Even as their hulls ruptured and their engines died, they kept firing. Even as entire vessels exploded into debris, the survivors charged forward into the gaps. A human destroyer, its bridge destroyed and its engines failing, used its last moments of power to ram directly into a Velthari cruiser, and both ships vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. "They are insane," Rextal whispered. His tactical officer was shouting numbers that made no sense. "3 ships lost, High Commander, now 5, now 7. We are destroying them, but they will not stop." "Why do they not retreat?" Rextal demanded. "This is illogical. They are sustaining massive losses. Any rational species would withdraw." The answer came from the human flagship, as Fleet Admiral Chen's voice cut through all frequencies. "Attention Velthari forces," James said, his voice carrying the weight of every human who had ever lost a child. "You have taken something that belongs to us. You have touched our children, and now you will learn what that means." The vengeful father broke through the Velthari line, its massive guns blazing, and behind it poured the fury of humanity. Rextal watched his fleet dying around him, ship after ship falling to the relentless human assault, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never experienced before. "Fear." "High Commander," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving surrender requests from 3 of our vessels." "Denied," Rextal snarled. "No Velthari surrenders." But even as he spoke, he saw the human marines beginning their assault. Boarding pods slammed into Velthari hulls, and warriors in powered armor carved through his soldiers like they were made of paper, and the screams of the dying filled the communication channels. The Velthari warriors fought with all their skill and all their ferocity, but they had never faced an enemy like this. The humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like parents defending their young, with a fury and desperation that went beyond tactics or training or self-preservation. A Marine with both legs blown off kept firing until his rifle ran empty, then crawled forward to detonate a grenade against an enemy position. A pilot whose ship was crippled flew it directly into the Velthari command center, giving his life to destroy their tactical coordination. Everywhere Rextal looked, humans were dying, but they were taking 10 Velthari with them for everyone they lost. "This is impossible," he said, watching his flagship's shields begin to fail. "They are only humans." The bridge shook as the vengeful father's main guns found their mark, and Rextal knew that he had only moments left. He opened a channel to the human flagship. "Why?" he demanded. "This response is disproportionate. We took only a few dozen specimens. Your losses already exceed what we harvested. This makes no logical sense." Fleet Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen, and his eyes were the eyes of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "You want logic," James said. "Here is your logic. You took my daughter." "One child," Rextal protested. "One small, weak creature." "She is not weak," James said. "She is everything. She is the reason I breathe and the reason I fight and the reason your species is about to learn what extinction feels like. You would sacrifice thousands of your own people for one child." James smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Rextal had ever seen. "I would sacrifice millions," he said. "I would burn every star in the galaxy. There is no price too high and no distance too far and no enemy too strong." He leaned forward. You touched my daughter, he said, and now you will pay. The vengeful father's main cannon charged, and Rextal had just enough time to understand that he had made a terrible mistake before his flagship became scattered atoms. The battle lasted 11 more minutes. When it was over, 18 Velthari warships had been reduced to debris, and the research station floated alone and undefended in the void. On the bridge of the vengeful father, Fleet Admiral James Chen gave his final order of the battle. Marines, secure the station, find our people, bring them home. And then he did something that none of his crew had ever seen him do. He closed his eyes and prayed that he was not too late. Sergeant Maria Santos led her squad through the corridors of the Velthari research station, her rifle sweeping left and right as they advanced through the cold alien darkness. The station was massive, a labyrinth of metal halls and sealed chambers, and somewhere in this maze were 93 human prisoners who had been waiting for rescue. Keep moving, she ordered her team. Check every room, every cell, every closet. We are not leaving anyone behind. The Marines had been fighting for 16 hours straight, clearing the station deck by deck, and exhaustion was beginning to pull at their muscles and their minds. But none of them complained. None of them asked for rest, because they all knew what they were fighting for. In Research Lab 7, lead researcher Vorkith crouched behind an overturned table, listening to the sounds of gunfire and screaming, getting closer with each passing minute. He had watched the human fleet tear through the Dominion's defenses like they were made of paper, and he had listened to High Commander Rextal's final transmission before his flagship exploded. Now he understood something that all his years of study had never taught him. The humans were not weak. They had simply never had a reason to show their strength. The door to the lab exploded inward, and 3 human Marines poured through the gap, their weapons tracking across the room until they found Vorkith cowering in the corner. "Do not shoot," he said, his translator converting his clicks and hisses into human words. "I surrender." Sergeant Santos walked up to him and looked down with eyes that held no mercy. "Where are the prisoners?" "Detention level 4, Vorkith replied quickly. "All surviving specimens are being held there." Santos gestured to her team. "Take him, we will deal with him later." 2 Marines grabbed Vorkith and dragged him away, and Santos led the rest of her squad toward the detention level. They found the first prisoners 10 minutes later, a group of 30 humans locked in cells along a narrow corridor, and the moment they saw the Marine armor they began to cry and laugh and reach through the bars toward their rescuers. "Open these doors," Santos ordered. "Medics, start triage. Get these people ready for transport." But even as she supervised the rescue, her eyes were scanning the cells, looking for something specific. Looking for the children. She found them in a separate wing, 7 small cells containing 7 small figures, and when she saw them her heart clenched in her chest. They were thin and pale, with dark circles under their eyes and bandages on their arms where the Velthari had taken samples, but they were alive. They were alive. A little girl with black hair and bright eyes looked up as Santos approached her cell, and despite everything she had been through, she smiled. "Are you here to take us home?" she asked. Santos felt tears running down her cheeks beneath her helmet. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, "we are here to take you home." She keyed her communicator. "Admiral Chen, this is Sergeant Santos. We have located the children. All 7 are alive. I repeat, all 7 are alive." There was a long pause, and when James Chen's voice came back it was thick with emotion. "And Lily, is Lily there?" Santos looked at the little girl, who was still smiling at her through the cell bars. "What is your name, honey?" "Lily," the girl said. "Lily Chen, is my daddy here?" Santos could not speak for a moment, and when she found her voice it was barely a whisper. "Admiral, your daughter is asking for you." She heard James Chen take a shaky breath. "Tell her I am on my way." 15 minutes later, the door to the detention wing opened, and a man in Admiral's uniform walked through, his eyes searching frantically until they found what they were looking for. "Daddy!" Lily ran toward her father, and James dropped to his knees and caught her in his arms, holding her so tight that he never wanted to let go. "I told them you would come," Lily whispered into his chest. "I told them you would find me." "I will always find you," James said, tears streaming down his face. "No matter where you are or what stands in my way, I will always come for you." Around them, hardened Marines who had faced death without flinching wept openly at the sight of a father reunited with his daughter. But the reckoning was not over. In the months that followed, the United Earth Fleet did not return home. Instead, they moved deeper into Velthari space, systematically dismantling everything the Dominion had built. They destroyed shipyards and weapons factories and military installations, reducing them to rubble and dust, and they freed the slaves of 17 conquered species who had given up hope of ever seeing freedom again. The Velthari leadership sent message after message, begging for peace, offering territory and resources and reparations, promising anything if the humans would just stop. Admiral Tanaka's response was broadcast across every frequency in the galaxy. "The Velthari Dominion took human children," she said. "They experimented on them, they hurt them, they treated them like objects to be studied and discarded." Her voice was cold and absolute. "We do not forgive this. We do not forget this. And we do not stop until the lesson is learned." The Velthari were not exterminated. That was not humanity's way. But their military was destroyed, their empire was shattered, and their proud species was reduced to a handful of colonies that posed no threat to anyone. And when the Galactic Council gathered to discuss the human species that had emerged so suddenly and so violently onto the galactic stage, the representatives of 100 civilizations sat in stunned silence as they reviewed the data. "They came 300 light years," the Drexy ambassador said slowly. "They sacrificed 12,000 soldiers and 200 ships. They tore apart an empire that had conquered 17 species. And they did all of this for 93 prisoners, including 7 children." "That is correct," the human ambassador replied, a woman named Sarah Chen who had a very familiar smile. "Why?" the Drexy asked. "From a purely logical standpoint, the cost far exceeded the value of what was recovered." Ambassador Chen looked around the chamber at the assembled species, and her eyes held the same fire that had burned in her brother's eyes when he led the fleet to rescue his daughter. "You are asking the wrong question," she said. "You are trying to understand humans through logic and calculation, and that will never work." She stood up and addressed the entire council. "We humans have a concept called family," she said, "and family is not about logic. Family is about love, and love does not count costs or measure risks or calculate odds." She pointed toward the stars visible through the chamber windows. "Somewhere out there, in every human settlement on every world we have colonized, there are children playing and laughing and dreaming of the future. And every single adult in human space has made the same promise, spoken or unspoken." Her voice rang out clear and strong. "We will protect them. We will fight for them. We will die for them. And if anyone hurts them, we will make sure that whatever did it will never hurt anyone again." The chamber was silent. "This is not a threat," Ambassador Chen said. "It is simply who we are. We do not start wars, but we end them. We do not seek conquest, but we will not tolerate cruelty. And if you ever touch one of our children—" She paused and let her words sink in. "Then what happened to the Velthari will seem merciful by comparison." She sat down, and the council adjourned in silence. That night, every species in the galaxy added a new entry to their archives on humanity. Classification: extreme threat. Threat response: do not engage. Special note: The humans have a concept they call protective instinct. It is not a weakness. It is the most dangerous weapon in the known universe. Under no circumstances should their young be harmed. This is not a suggestion. This is survival. And in a small house on Earth, a little girl named Lily Chen slept peacefully in her bed, holding a stuffed rabbit and dreaming of the stars. Her father sat in a chair beside her, watching her sleep, and he knew that he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never had another nightmare. Because that was what fathers did. And God help anyone who ever forgot it.